On the stage, thank you. And while the gentlemen are taking their seats, as I mentioned earlier, you, the audience, will have a chance to ask questions directly to Professor Piketty. So do not miss this opportunity. Using your mobile phones, you can send your questions, you can text your questions rather, to sharp 5600. Once again, as you see on the screen, text your questions to sharp 5600. We will select a number of your questions and hand them to Professor Piketty so that they may answer your questions after the discussion. So if we are all ready, the panel discussion will be moderated by Professor Lee Ji-soon from Seoul National University. I will now turn the mic over to you, Professor Lee Ji-soon. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Lee Ji-soon from Seoul National University.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a very high honor for me to lead this conversation with Thomas Piketty this morning. We have just heard very interesting stories from both sides, and we'll talk about these issues. Before that, let me introduce our guests and discussants. From my left, we have Professor Lawrence Kotelnikov from Boston University, and Professor Thomas Piketty from Paris School of Economics. And we have Professor Won-dong Cho of Jungwang University, former Senior Secretary of Economic Affairs to Blue House, and Professor Jong-il Liu from KDI School, and Professor Kwano Shin Kwano from Korea University. Thank you for coming here. We have just heard the essence of capital in the 21st century from its author, Thomas Piketty, Paris School of Economics. And also we have also heard some remarks on the ideas of Piketty's ideas from Lawrence Kotelnikov. And this, as you just heard, that Lawrence disagrees somewhat with Thomas Piketty, and I'm sure also our discussants might have different opinions, and so we are going to listen to them. Before that, let me just briefly summarize what Piketty says in several sentences. Before that, let me introduce the procedure. Let's go back. Okay, we'll have 3 rounds of discussions. First 2 would be between Thomas Piketty and the designated discussant, and the final 3rd round will be between Piketty and general audience. And as the moderator says, you can send your message, or at the end also you can raise your hand and raise your questions, okay? And the essence of Piketty's claim can be seen by, please have the next slide. 2 slides. Somebody. Okay. Now I have here one picture. This is for general audience. Do you see the picture, right? And we have these 3 different phases of inequality. This suggests both inequality in income and wealth. Of course, the actual picture would be slightly different for income and inequality. During the first phase, from the beginning of Industrial Revolution and until maybe 1910 or even 1930s, we see that world income and wealth inequality is very severe. So only the top, tiny people owns almost all income or wealth. And the bottom, maybe 90 or 95% of people have very small income and almost no wealth. So it is extreme inequality. Then during maybe 1910 or 1930, from 1930 to beginning of the end of 1970s, that means 1980, we have seen market improvement in the distribution, inequality in income and wealth. Here, what's remarkable is that there's an emergence of so-called middle class. Middle class, about 60% of people, they own a lot of wealth also. And also another interesting fact is a decrease in the share of poor people. Of course, there are still poor people. And the top 1% or 10% of people owns large wealth, but in relative share, it has declined. But as Thomas Piketty just showed us, since 1980, in many countries, this income and wealth distribution is becoming very worse. So now there's a tendency, almost unstoppable tendency, for the rich get richer and the poor getting poorer. So we'll have also 1% versus 99% kind of income and wealth inequality. And Piketty says the main reason for this has to do with the different speed in growth of wealth income and labor income. He is R and G, and he foresees that there's no reason why R would decline, but there are many reasons why G may decline. So in future, we'll see the gap between R and G would go up. As it happens, then Piketty argues that the picture we see since 1980 will become even worse. So that's the essence of what Piketty says. So I want to hear now opinions from our guests. And in the first round, I will give time to only 3 discussants here. Then second round, Lawrence can join. And you'll have 5 minutes. And my question is that whether you agree with Piketty, if so, why? If not, why? In what respect? And secondly, how relevant Piketty's ideas for Korean situation, where we have seen market increase in average income, but recently we also see increasing inequality. Let me first turn to Professor Cho, Won-Dong Cho.
Thank you very much. I've given only 5 minutes, so I need to be very brief. In order to show my argument, I prepared some chart. So my strategy is like this. As a way of critique, Professor Kotelnikov touched upon the issue of who are the actually top market capitalists. If they keep changing, they may not endanger dynamism of a market economy, as Professor Piketty suggests. So my strategy is that I'd like to share with you what Piketty K, capital K, is actually comprised of. Can I have my first chart, please? So first chart, please. Yes. Actually, I took this chart from Piketty's own book. And the left-hand side shows Germany, the capital K. And the left-hand side is the United States. In his book, the United States is described as younger countries in terms of degree of capital accumulation. But as you can see, the real estate like agriculture, housing actually account for the bulky item of the capital K, the Piketty K in this chart. In his book, I didn't have a chart, but in his book, in France, the real estate account for as much as the 80% of the capital, the Piketty K. And then my second chart shows that they come from Professor Logny at MIT, who seems to follow the line of Professor Surma's critique on Piketty by using Piketty's own data. As you can see, much of the recent hike of the capital over Y, which is beta, was attributable to the very rapidly increasing value of lending. Value of housing, sorry. What about Korea? Can I have my third chart? My third chart shows that the value of land had been decreased up until 2000, although the trend was somewhat reversed after then. I believe that this explains why our behave differently in Korea from what Professor Piketty observed in Western countries, as shown in my fourth chart. Actually, this chart is the preliminary result of using Bank of Korea data, which shows clearly that R minus G was mostly negative rather than positive up until year 2000, early 2000. This also shows that the R minus G trend tends to become positive recently, but the evidence is not conclusive yet. What can we get from all this? I argue that penalizing capital regarding sources of accumulation, as Professor Piketty recommends, would be largely detrimental to the Korean economy. Korea has already taxed on real estate much more severely than OECD countries, as my final chart, which I believe the major reason behind the decreasing land value in Korea. Why do we have to tax on other incomes as harshly as income from real estate? Furthermore, Korea is a small open economy. This means that the Korean capital holders, perhaps excluding real estate ones, are likely to expose more to foreign competition than Western counterparts. They have little choice other than stay innovate for their own survival. Should it be there worrisome for the patrimonial capitalism? I argue that bringing more competition is the right answer, rather than discouraging their entrepreneurship. I believe that it is not time for Korea to concern about the patrimonial capitalism. On the contrary, it is still time for us to work hard to invigorate growth, which shows signs of lagging recently. I stop here, hearing from other panels on the point of how to upgrade the growth rate, G, rather than discouraging R. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And next, Professor Jong-il Liu from KDI School.
I must first say that I think Professor Piketty's work is highly relevant to Korea, and I'm very happy to be here and share my thoughts about, can I have the slides? The Korean experience in light of Piketty's works. My first observation, next page, is that until 20 years ago, next page, please. 이거 누가 하는 거예요? Korea was one of the fastest growing economies in the world, running fast like Usain Bolt. But since the financial crisis of 1997, we look very old with lots of wrinkles on our face, looking very old, even though our physical age is not so old. What do I mean by the wrinkles? Signs of premature aging. They are slowdown of growth, rising inequality, patrimonial wealth, and declining social mobility. Can I go to D1? Push D1, please. D1. Yes. So this is the recently uploaded Korean data in the world top incomes table, and it shows from the middle of 1990s, the top income shares in Korea have been rising very rapidly. Next. The next page, okay? And in terms of earnings inequality from the OECD, we have that Korea has the highest incidence of low pay, along with the United States, and third highest, inequality measured in terms of P90 to P10 ratio. And next, patrimonial wealth. What I mean by this is, if you look at the super rich people, most of them are inherited rather than self-made, which is somewhat in contrast to the United States. Next. In terms of social mobility, we don't have long time series data, so this is just a survey of perceptions, and it's quite alarming. Between 2006 and 2010, people who answer that diligence and effort is the most important factor for success in Korea declined from over 40% to less than 30%, whereas it's important to have the right family background or educational background. And the two of them are getting more interrelated these days, as we all know. They increased from less than 50% to over 60%. Very alarming and unfortunate change, I guess. We can go back to the page 3. I thought you had rehearsals. Okay, this is it. My next observation is the comparison between the Western experience, Piketty analysis, and the Korean experience. There has been this big 3 stages of evolution: the rejuvenation with falling inequality, rapid growth with low inequality, and slowdown of growth accompanied by rising inequality. In the US and European case, it was the period of 2 world wars and Great Depression in between, the Golden Age, and the period since 1980s. In Korea case, the rejuvenation was brought about by the destruction of the Korean War and the land reform in the 1950s. And we had the green period, high growth, modest inequality, rapid industrialization in the 60s up until the foreign exchange crisis of 1997. And since then, we have slowdown of growth and rising inequality. Next page, please. So, some aspects of this premature aging, I look at demographics, capital accumulation, and political degeneration. In terms of rhyming, I actually call demographic over-transition. We have the lowest birth rates, and we have the fastest population aging in the world. In terms of capital accumulation, I did some calculations in terms of capital income ratio and capital share of income. And in both measures, Korea's numbers are very, very high. And I don't have time to go into details, but we can discuss this later with Piketty, I guess. Can you push D5? This is just the capital share of income. The green line at the bottom is Korean share, and labor share. So it means capital share is increasing very rapidly, which is pretty much tracked by the stock market index. Okay, go back to the text. You can just push the button at the bottom. 4. 돌아가세요. Okay, so these 3 aspects of aging certainly can explain slowdown of growth, but can they actually explain a rising inequality? The first is demographics. Demographics can explain the deterioration of income distribution to a certain extent because of old age poverty, but not the rise in top incomes. Capital accumulation, this is where Professor Piketty comes in. And as I just showed you, we have very big dramatic rise in capital share of income, and I think it's certainly is part of the story of rising inequality. But then there is a question about what part of rising inequality is due to that, and what part of it is due to job polarization and other labor market developments. The third aspect of aging, I think is, can I have this? On the political side, I refer to Mensa Olson's rise and decline of nations. So it's interest group politics, distributional coalitions that can lead to certain loss of efficiency and dynamism. So these are my observations, and next round I may add some of my thoughts again.
Thank you, Professor Yu. You can have questions next round. Okay?
Yeah, sure. And I didn't get the best cooperation with my slides.
Professor Shin, please.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me to this very honorable event. And thank you very much, Piketty, your nice presentation. I really your presentation. As you know, your book is recently translated in Korean, and it's really sensational. And I'm not sure whether your book is going to be as successful as in the US, but I'm sure that it's going to be a big success. And I think that this kind of popularity of your book reflects that income inequality is really important issue in Korea as well. I totally agree with that. But I'm not, 100% in agreement with your diagnosis of why income inequality is aggravating recently. At least I think that it's a little bit difficult to apply your model to Korea to explain the recent rise in income inequality. This graph shows that income inequality in terms of Gini index, which is the red line, I believe, blue line, and the second red line is the income inequality in terms of 1% income share, which is your favorite measure. And this clearly shows that income inequality started to escalate since the 1997, the financial crisis in 1997. But in your book, actually, you didn't have a chance to show all the graphs, but in your book, income inequality was severely reduced after the World War, 2 World Wars and Great Depression, right? The reason is that basically many capital, physical capital was destructed, and many companies went bankrupt after World War II and Great Depression. But in Korea, maybe this financial crisis is not comparable to the world wars, but maybe similar to the Great Depression. Actually, we had many chaebols in bankrupt, and the price of real estate plummeted. So that probably probably led to significant decrease in capital income ratio, and maybe a significant decrease in income from capital. But still, our graph shows that our inequality started to increase just after the financial crisis in 1997, which is a little bit difficult to explain based on your model. Of course, your model is long-term model, more than 100, 200 years, and our experience is of relatively short term. But I think that we need to fix the problems we face right now, right? That's more important, to fix the problems we have right now based on correct assessment. Why income inequality is increasing here in Korea. And there are many aspects of income inequality in Korea which are important. One is that the middle income class is shrinking, and there is conflicts between regular and irregular workers and so on. So probably it might be more important to address those kind of issues we face right now than dealing with maybe 1% top income share you are emphasizing. So let me stop here, and maybe in the next round I'll ask more questions.
Thank you, Professor Shin. Now I'll return the mic to Thomas Piketty. To save some time, can you keep your remarks in 6 minutes?
Okay, let's try to do this. Yeah. So thanks a lot for all these remarks by Larry and the three of you. I was really very, very interested in all the data that you've presented on Korea, and it's a pity that we don't have more time. Let me say very clearly that all this thing about R and G is certainly not the only mechanism that matters for income inequality. As I made clear at the beginning of my presentation, education, for instance, investment in skills, the working of the labor market, as the last commentator was saying, are very, very important, and probably even more important in the long run than these things on R and G. So, the book does talk about this other mechanism as well, and sometimes maybe it's summarized a bit in a bit too fast. And so let me take some of the remarks that were made, and starting from Larry and then moving to the presentation on Korea. So Larry told us that transfer to the poor are very important in the US, and told us about social security millionaire, and we should not only think about the billionaires at the top, we also need to think about the social security millionaires. Okay, so I agree about that. I agree, and I actually do talk about transfer in my book, and I agree that when I show this big rise in inequality in the US, it doesn't count transfer, and when you add transfer, then you do get positive income growth for the bottom 50%. But still, at the same time, it is a bit sad that you need transfer to get income growth for the bottom 50%. And I think it's hardly satisfactory a country when during a 30-year period, in terms of primary income, the bottom 50% gets very, very little growth, and it's only because of transfer that you get growth. So I think it's not really satisfactory. You would like investment in education, investment in skills, so that people can access to jobs with rising wages. The minimum wage in the US right now has a purchasing power that is less than in the 1960s, and there was no more unemployment in the 60s than today. So, it's not satisfactory that all the growth at the bottom is coming from transfer. Let me also make very clear, why is R bigger than G, important for wealth inequality? So, when in the long run, say the growth rate is only 1% and the rate of return 5%. This doesn't mean that inequality will rise forever. I've never said that R bigger than G implies that inequality rises forever. All what this means is that if you start with some wealth and you get capital income out of this wealth, you can consume 4/5 of the return to capital, 80%, and you only need to reinvest 1/5, so 20% of the capital income, so that your wealth rises as fast as the size of the economy. So then some families will consume more, some families will consume less, some families will have many children, some will have too few, some will die too late, some will die too soon. I completely agree with this. All what I am saying is that for given parameters about demographic behavior, saving behavior, a higher gap between R and G will allow to sustain higher concentration and perpetuation of wealth. And you're going to have a very hard time explaining the very high concentration of wealth we observe throughout history, because I'm not only trying to explain one data point in the US, which is very respectable, but I try to explain many countries over a very long period of time, and that's going to be very difficult with the life cycle model and no intended bequest. And you can try, but I don't think that will work. Coming back to Korea, I agree that real estate prices, are going to play an important role actually in every country, not only in Korea. That's probably going to be an important part of the variation in beta. I'm really looking forward to see the full series on wealth income ratio in Korea. Let me just make clear that although high real estate prices can explain sometime in some countries rise in beta, that's not going to explain rise in R, because once beta is very high, it is the opposite. It pushes R to low level, for a given capital share. So it's a bit more complicated than that, and the R bigger than G, is not going to be determined by the real estate price so much. Let me also make clear that the progressive wealth tax I am referring to is not aimed at all at penalizing capital accumulation. The aim is to favor wealth mobility. So typically, in many countries, the wealth tax that we have right now are not progressive. So if you take the United States and many European countries, the property tax is not progressive. It is proportional, and also it doesn't take into account your financial debt or your financial assets. So for instance, if you have a house that's worth, 500,000 euros, but you have a mortgage of 480,000 euros, you are not rich. Your net wealth is only 20,000 euros. And, in my system, you will not pay any property tax or wealth tax. Whereas in today's tax system in most countries, you pay as much property tax than someone without a mortgage who inherited from his house a long time ago. And I think that's wrong. So my point will be, you keep the same tax revenue as the existing property tax, but you transform it into a progressive wealth tax so that you increase wealth mobility and you increase the opportunity for people who start only with their labor income and who don't have wealth to begin with to start accumulating wealth. So the purpose is not at all to penalize wealth accumulation, but to increase the mobility of wealth over time, which I think is really useful. Maybe let me just mention finally another point. Why is it that demographics are so important for the dynamics of capital accumulation and also inequality in my model? So of course, the demographics can have an impact on how much wealth is being accumulated, in particular for life cycle purposes, but it also has an impact on the importance of inheritance in a society. Why is it so? If everybody has 10 children, of course, you should not count too much on inheritance, because everything is going to be divided by 10 at each generation, so you better save by yourself and accumulate your own wealth. But now if you take the opposite case, if every family has only one kid, then you inherit from both sides, well, in rich families, or you inherit from zero side in poor family. So the relative importance of inherited wealth, is likely to become even bigger in countries with stagnating or even more so diminishing population. And we already see that, in Europe, in Germany, in Italy, and I think, this is going to be a very big issue for countries like Korea and China in the future. And, I think diminishing population is something that is really quite frightening if you think of the dynamics of wealth accumulation and inheritance. And it's important. So, and this can also have an impact on inequality. In any theoretical model, I have a lot of respect for theory, but, I think it's important for economists to do more historical analysis to see how much of the pure theory is doing. And in any theoretical model of wealth accumulation, even though you have wealth mobility, even though you have shocks of various kinds, for any given variance of such shocks, a bigger R minus G, for instance, because you have lower population growth, therefore lower G, will tend to amplify these shocks and will lead to a bigger variance of state wealth inequality. So all the other shocks matter, all the other demographic factors, saving behavior, labor market factors are extremely important, of course, but taking them as given, the diminishing growth per se, and possibly rising rate of return because of competition to attract capital between countries, which, I understand is a serious concern for any small open economy in the world like Korea. And, every European country is bound to become a small open economy, and it's already a small economy as compared to the size of the world economy. So we have the same issues. It's very difficult on your own to do anything against, tax competition to attract capital investment. And, still I believe that better coordination between countries, to fight tax haven, to have minimal tax on large multinational corporations and large wealth holders is possible. It is difficult, but it is possible, if we want to preserve support for globalization.
Okay, thank you. Now let's conclude the first round. Now we will begin the second round. For the second round, we want to, in fact, draw lessons that are much more relevant to Korea. Of course, Thomas Piketty showed the big picture, the global picture, but we are more interested in what's in store for our nation. And let me summarize a few facts. Korea has grown a lot in the past, but the real growth rate has declined very sharply in recent years. And during the high growth period, Korean income and wealth distribution had become very equal, more or less equal. But now, recently, it's becoming very unequal. So we face the same situation. But the cause and mechanism might be different. And also how to deal with those may be different for Korea. Maybe somebody may argue that it's what it needs investment or invigorating growth, that kind of thing. So now let's turn to our discussants to hear their views about what we Koreans should do, that kind of things. Let me first turn to Professor Cho. Can you?
Thank you very much. Mr. Piketty, I guess much of the confusion about your book is your choice of the word, actual definition. Your capital K is not actually the capital in the growth theory, in the conventional growth theory. Normally we exclude land, the real estate. But in your case, you include the real estate, and then so you are talking about the patrimonial capitalism. So this is a kind of a. I really think that your book, title of your book is a bit of a misnomer. It's not actually. It's not the normal sense of capital. It is more like the wealth, or in particular, real estate in the 21st century, rather than the capital in the 21st century. Yeah, I reiterate this point because real estate is likely to be even bigger item when estimating the Piketty K in emerging economies. You know, the development is normally taking place together with the urbanization, a rapid speed of urbanization, which in turn increase land value, real estate value. As a matter of fact, real estate like land, building, and housing account for more than 80% of non-financial assets in Korea, even these days. I have prepared a chart, but you will see in later. But the question is it really bad? I would argue that it is necessary evil, inevitable during the development process. A more relevant question then would be how to prevent real estate capital, not all forms of capital, from degenerating into patrimonial capital. Actually, in the first round, I showed that Korea has been very much effective in introducing progressive tax in real estate already. Another point I'd like to add is the fact that the capital depreciation cost plays much larger role in Korea than Western countries. Professor Piketty excluded the capital depreciation cost in estimating K. This is not surprising at all, given that the Piketty K takes the form of real estate. But in Korea, even real estate incurs very large depreciation costs. You know, so urban housing in Korea tends to be undergo remodeling, reconstruction, renovation, and even complete reconstruction much frequently. Even yesterday, a news broke out that a renowned car company decides to spend as much as $10 billion in purchasing small piece of land in the city center, which is currently used as the headquarters of a public corporation. What does this mean? It will take much longer time for Piketty K to be accumulated long enough to degenerate into patrimonial capital in Korea than Western countries. So based on this, I strongly believe that the Professor Piketty's findings and policy recommendation has less applicability to the case of Korea. If I may, 1 minute, I fully agree with the Professor Kotlikoff's point that the income study, wealth study, should include middle and the lower income bracket as well. And this is particularly true in the case of Korea in the agriculture. So agriculture is totally exempt from the taxation. That is not even the tax net. But so now many people in agriculture is making rich, making wealth. So we have to include this into consideration when we properly debate the income inequality in Korea. Thank you.
Thank you. And essentially, he's talking about we should distinguish between so-called productive capital and maybe less or unproductive capital. And now, Professor Yu.
I have a couple of things to say to Professor Piketty, but before that, can I ask a question to Professor Kotlikov? Because one of the slides, he showed the big difference between the distribution of assets and the distribution of lifetime spending. So those with a lot of assets, they spend only a fraction of that wealth during lifetime, so they bequeath a lot, and then they leave a lot of bequests to their offsprings. The rest of the population leave very little. It is not because these rich people care about their offsprings and the rest don't. It's the ability to leave, okay? So isn't that the mechanism that actually increases wealth inequality? Now about Professor Piketty's arguments, I think, again, I find his policy recommendations are indeed very relevant to Korea. The first, I'd like to re-emphasize something that he mentioned during his presentation, which is access to high-quality education, to all sections of the society. And here in Korea, education used to be a ladder for upward social mobility. Nowadays, it seems to have become a means of bequest. The best universities, the access to best universities are becoming more and more restricted to people with privileged backgrounds. And finally, there has been recently quite a bit of talk about Piketty's taxation proposal in Korea. So even before you came, there have been discussions, and especially from the business community, there seems to be worries about whether increasing taxation could lead to lower investment and lower growth. I'd like to emphasize that some research at the IMF recently have emphasized that taxation and redistribution can actually be positive for economic growth. And the mechanism is that you can design increased taxation and redistribution in a way that is rather neutral to growth. But as a result of redistribution, you will improve income distribution, which has a positive effect on economic growth. This comes from the research director of the IMF. And I think Korea has really a lot of room for this purpose. Korea being the country among the OECD countries that has the least amount of redistribution. We really have a lot of room for growth-enhancing redistribution. This is my observation.
Okay, thank you. Now, Professor Shin.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd also like to talk something about your policy recommendation, which is the wealth tax, capital taxation. And I think that is very consistent policy from your book and your theory and empirical facts. But I think that it might be a little bit difficult to apply your policy to developing countries, less developed countries like Korea. You mentioned that European countries are also small open economy. That's true, and our economy is also small open economy. But our economy is at the same time, less developed countries, and which means that we have to develop faster than advanced countries. There are many things we can do to grow faster, And one of them is that we need to make steady investment and accumulate more capital. But your policy, you said that you do not want to penalize the wealth holders. But I think that if we impose capital taxation, probably it will decrease the incentive to accumulate more capital. Our investment rate is around a little bit less than 30% right now, which is contrasted to 17% in the US, which is the most advanced country. And which means that we are making more investment, right? And that is true because we need to grow more, faster. So that I'm not sure whether the policy you recommended for advanced countries that can be also appropriate for less developed countries. And probably that's the potentially major hurdle when you seek for international cooperation from developing countries like China or India. And finally, I'll also talk a little bit about the one important policy Korea is pursuing right now. In your book, one possibility to decrease income inequality is